Hi there, how's it going? I am here. It's just I don't look my best, so I'm just simply not appearing on the camera. So the camera is like pointed at the ceiling. It looks much darker than what it is, but I've not got the best webcam anyway, and I'm fucking ugly. I don't use YouTube because I'm unvaccinated. And before I refused vaccination on the basis it's a Nuremberg Code violation, I was also opposed to the Nuremberg Code violations of the suicide clinics in the Netherlands, going way back to 2007, which is ironically the same date at which all those so-called not conspiracy theorists were, being made aware of the COVID-19 scenario in 2020, when we were being told about the plans for this in 2007, which of course is never going to appear on the platforms of the conspirators. So I turned to BitChute in that era, and YouTube it's nonsense. It's Google, and it's even before it was Google, like YouTube, its original subscribers. I think there's this phrase in the world today called anti-government, and that is when people in a democracy engage in conversations which are critical of the system that they live in. Back when YouTube began, that was the kind of conversations that were mostly appearing on YouTube. That was the kind of videos, because it was the first video sharing platform. And at the time, it was, oh yes, we can create our own television channel here. And everybody was like, oh, I'm going to report the stuff that the media is not reporting. So that was basically YouTube. That was the first content creators on YouTube. They created YouTube. And I don't know what it was, people with vested interest in silencing people. But for whatever reason, YouTube changed its policies of permitting people to see the most watched, the most liked, the most commented, the videos that people were genuinely interested in, and suddenly there's a YouTube. You couldn't even see what was the best videos, and then you began to see what YouTube wanted you to see rather than what the original content creators were actually, So they basically ditched their original content creators to create something more pro-government, and the anti-government was just a normal part of democracy. You would engage in, you would go to the pub and you'd engage in conversations. As you can tell, I have a Scottish accent, so I live in Britain. And you would go to a pub and say, see what the Tories are up to now, see that Margaret Thatcher. That was just normal anti-government, as they call it today. That's not permissible on the modern internet in a lot of places. So a lot of people, they move to platforms like BitChute and Gab and Minds and stuff like that, places where they could engage in free speech without interference of the privacy of home and correspondence, as the international human rights covenants discuss. I'm just telling you, there's a simple moral principle there that you don't, interfere in that sort of stuff. If I say, well, if I'm to say, oh, I think Bob's great, you don't go and say to Bob, he calls you a wanker. That's kind of, interference in communication, the very, moral principle of it. Well, that's all protected by huge international covenants that are just being broadly ignored by what I'm going to call pro-government extremists. And so my BitChute channel, in regards to the BBC is being sued, so the British Broadcasting Corporation, our company, is being sued by Donald Trump for somewhere between $1 billion and $5 billion, right? And I'm aware of things that are going on. I say the BBC, but it's the British media in general. Like, they're in cahoots running their own electoral college. They've got the whole political system rigged here in the UK. And I've known this for 32 years. So, when it became a story and, it wasn't just like the whole world media in the past week, everywhere from, Russia to America, from from one side of the world to the next, big state news organisations, the big news story was the BBC is engaged in fake news, false information, propaganda, which, coming from Britain, we used to, during the Cold War, we used to point at the Soviet Union and say false information, fake news, propaganda. This is the sort of stuff that the BBC and, the British media has been involved in for 32 years on a massive scale. And when you're living in a planet that is filled with people who believe that stuff without question, it's quite traumatic. It's quite traumatic. So, when that became a worldwide news story, I used my BitChute channel to start sticking the boot in. And, well, for some strange reason, now my BitChute channel appears to be stuck in process and publish anytime I try to upload any videos. I've tried to upload the same video several times. I've tried to re-render the video and upload that, and I've tried to do completely other videos, and I've done various, tests, and the channel is always stuck in process and published no matter what I upload after I've divulged controversial information. So I'm on YouTube here, and the purpose is to divulge controversial information. And I know that YouTube is itself, it's like a Google platform. Like Google assisted the Chinese Communist Party to construct the Great Firewall of China, and the various Nuremberg Code violations of 2020. And there's various different things that Google has done, which makes me totally distrust them. Because I can remember, like, when the big search engines were Yahoo, Excite, Lycos, and Alta Vista. There was no Google at a point. And back then, when you searched for something, if I was to search for, like, toasted beans, in the first 3 pages, I'd have got a toasted beans recipe. But, something as non-obscure as that, it wasn't like some difficult to find thing. The first result would have been, toasting beans, how to make toasting beans. And it'd have been like some website created by a chef. Today, if you search for, well, have a look at the item to your left. Whatever that item is, go and search for it online. And I guarantee you all the top results in a modern search engine is coming from big media corporations. They have become billboards for media corporation information. You're looking for a chef that knows how to make toast and beans, or whatever that item is to your left, someone that's like an expert in that subject area, and all the search results are from media corporations. That's what happened to the internet. And I'm here on YouTube, which is knowingly, that's what happened to the internet when Google came along, because Google came along as a search engine, and it was a brilliant search engine because it was really, really fast. Compared to, Lycos and Alta Vista and Yahoo and the various search engines that were around at the time. It was really, really fast. And there was various things you could do, like queries you could make to say, like, I would like to get all results from that particular site or from that particular country, or files of that particular file type. Extra bits and pieces that the other search engines didn't have, and it was really fast. So within a very short period of time, like 90% of the public were using these, like Google, to the exclusion of all the search engines that used to be out there, like Yahoo and Lycos. So what happened with, like, Yahoo, all those original search engines, they began using, like, Google as a kind of, well, Yahoo didn't, but I believe Lycos and Alta Vista started using Google as their search engine, and they just sort of zombie fed and, filtered a bit the results that Google was feeding their website. So when you went to Lycos, you were basically looking at Google's results, similar to like Start Page or something like that. And slowly but surely, the internet became dominated by Google. And then, then they released email, Gmail as it was. So at the time, you could get a free email address with Yahoo or Lycos or Alta Vista or even your internet service provider. They no longer provide email addresses, but you used to get that, like this is your email address with your internet service provider. I think some might provide an email address, but not all of them do these days. So you get a free email address from the search engine or whatever services you used. And it was like 50 megabytes, and Google was offering 15 gigabytes. However, when it was first released, they were only giving it out to certain people, like people who had like social status in the various countries they were operating in. Like if you're a policeman, or if you were like a civil servant, or if you were, if you had some sort of social status, then you could get like a Gmail account. But if you weren't anyone of any status, you needed to be sponsored by someone who already had a Gmail account. Later on, they just made it if you want a Gmail account, anyone can get a Gmail account, but it was a desirable thing to have. It was actually at the time, it was like 50 megabytes on Yahoo, 2 gigabytes. 50 megabytes was your average free email service. But with Google, it was 2 gigabytes. That went up to 15 gigabytes later. So that's like the history of Google, where it all was okay, and then it all went tits up as Google started manipulating search results, and it eventually took over YouTube. And there was already, like, if you consider the freedom of expression and such, like the various, if you consider that to be normal, then YouTube was already corrupt, and then when Google took it over, it became even more corrupt. So I don't trust this platform. I've had more trust in BitChute since since people were under censorship and false information about vaccines. Well, let me put it this way, right? If I've got a PCR test, and I'm not COVID positive, and then I get a vaccine, and I should be immunised, and just to check, I go and get another test, and it's like I'm not COVID positive. I'm now immunised against this disease, and then I get another test later, and I've got the disease. Was the vaccine effective? This information was available at the time, especially to those who experienced that. And yet the media was saying safe and effective, 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 safe and effective. I think I can drive the point home here that they just repeated something that was completely false. It was self-evidently false, and they just kept repeating it, So where was I there? Yeah, so BitChute became, when we were unable to, even express what was self-evident online in various platforms like, YouTube and Facebook, and they're like Facebook with their independent fact checkers. There is no evidence whatsoever that the fact checkers are doing anything other than propaganda. We all turn to places like Gab and there was various things that were like Odyssey and Rumble. There was like anything that would permit people to speak the truth and express their opinion. So that ability, even if you're wrong, do you know what I mean? You should still have the right to say, this is my view. And because of that, let's suppose I'm at school, and I'm learning, I don't know, Pythagoras theory or something like that, and I say to the teacher that this is my view, then because I've got the freedom to speak in that context, the teacher can say, thank you for sharing your view, you're wrong. And then he can tell me where I'm wrong and demonstrate why I'm wrong. That's the very principle of freedom of expression. It's very, very important that people get to, hold in part. This fundamental right is expressed in international documents. And it's not being upheld, and it's not being protected by the rule of law, by governments themselves, who are insisting that our information goes to Google and such like. So there is a lot of corruption going on. If you consider human rights to be the basic standard, you could get human rights and you can become very wealthy and privileged. But as a bare minimum, you should have human rights. These are now under threat by governments who have turned the internet into a place where you cannot speak if you've got things to say that are informative about what's really going on in regards to the powers that be, which is quite the reverse of democracy, where we go to the pub. They've shut down the pubs in Scotland. A lot of the pubs went out of business because of smoking bans and various other regulated to death sort of things. And so now there are pubs that are still open and they get 3 customers a week, and it's like, how can they even afford to operate as a business? So there's what's left of the landscape of our ability to communicate with one another as a community, as a people, gone. And all that's left is an internet where free speech is restricted by the rule of law. That's how bad things have become. And, all the while we've been moving down this road, media corporations and governments have been saying, nutty conspiracy theory, nutty. So this is a nutty conspiracy theory, that I'm going to say here, but it's when you realise, what a nutty conspiracy theory actually is, when you get to hear what the media, etc., would tell you to hate and ignore. When you don't hate and ignore it, I'm going to reveal something to you that is going to blow your mind about the media. So it's about the Jeffrey Epstein files, and they're all over the place, even in the edgy, conspiracy theory community. They're always on about the Epstein files, and it's alleged that in these files there are videos, they've not been released. In these files, there are sexy children videos, and that's what the files are about. And the reason why Trump wants to stop these videos coming out is because of sexy children videos. Now, I found this sexy children videos and sexy children material to be a massive witch hunt operation that's been carried out against celebrities and politicians in Europe since the 90s. I'd never heard of the word paedophile before. No one who only speaks vernacular English had heard of the word paedophile before. Do you know what a convolution matrix is? I mean, everybody knows what a convolution matrix is. Everybody knows that word convolution, don't you? Let's be honest here, it is a very obscure word. You would have to have some sort of interest in a subject area where that word gets used. Well, that word paedophile was a word like that until the media started using it to attack various people, accusing them of this crime of paedophilia. Well, back then, before the media started these witch hunts against anyone that was not on board with their European integration plans, in disregard of democracy, I'm living in the post-Brexit Britain where European directives are still being implemented, and no one was put on trial for the betrayal of our democracy in '93, which was proven to be the case at Brexit, but not reported in the media, with its own agenda of European integration. So, without democracy, the voters are just slaves, So that's where my concern has been since the 1990s. So I've known about the media, I've known what it's all about. And I'm just wanting to divulge something to you here that's going to blow your mind about the modern world, And it's about the Epstein files, the sexy children thing that's supposed to be in these files that haven't been released. So that there's volume 1 and there's volume 2. Volume 1 has already been released. Volume 2. Now, when I'm saying files, you'd think of a filing cabinet and bits of paper, but these files include things like videos and audio recordings, as well as, normal written documents, but it's evidence. And the court has decided to it's released volume 1, but there's another whole batch of other stuff, volume 2, which the court has agreed to withhold. Or the legal phraseology is to preclude the files from being released. So, in case you find this document that I'm talking about, you'll realize, and this is a document from the court itself in regards to whether or not the file should be released or not, the file should be released or not. And the courts have agreed under an emergency procedure not to release the files, but void the Trump administration asked for Volume 1 and Volume 2 to be prevented from release. And the court says no, that there is no reason for Volume 1 not to be released, but Volume 2 under the current circumstances, we will prevent that from being released. And, given what the court is writing and their opinion and the reason why they've did this, it's the real reason why they're not releasing it is because of certain unusual behaviours from the Department of Justice. That's what's written in the court's opinion, that the court has released a document of their own writing saying this is the evidence and this is the view of the court in regards to a decision not to release these, not to permit these things to be released. And basically that is saying that the Volume 2 has been prevented from release because of this unusual behaviour from the Department of Justice. That's the long and the short of it. Now, the media's version of events is that the documents are not being released, and Trump has tried to stop them from being released because it contains sexy children videos that will condemn Trump and a whole load of his friends when they're released. And that, if I was to say, like, it does sound a bit controversial, but if I was to say this, it's currently November 2025. If I was to say that's the reason, and to the internet, most people would be saying, yeah, that's it. Anyone that watched a TV and had never used the internet before, they'd say, yeah, that's roughly, what it is that's being said. So I've given you a rough summation of the media version of events, and I've given you a rough summation of the court's version of events. For your information, I have access to the document the court has released. It's a court of record, a court of public opinion. You can find it yourself if you know what you're looking for. But when it contains words like preclusion, which means they prevent the document from being released, it does get a bit complicated. And it's been prevented from release without prejudice. Now, that without prejudice phrase is a legal thing. And what it basically means is that just because it shouldn't be held against Trump, that's basically what the court has declared, that there shouldn't be any prejudice against Donald Trump by any future courts, on the basis that this is not being released, and they give their opinion for future courts to read about why this is, and you can read it in there. Now, the big thing is that this thing about like sexy children and stuff like that. That according to what's actually going on in the court, the media is not reporting what is actually being said in the courts. The media is just making up a narrative, and everybody's believing it, and they're all talking about a story that's just been made up by the media. But the thing is actually about the documents not being released, and the thing going through the court is not being reported. And when you look at the court document, what it's actually about, it's what ought to be in those videos, given what the conversation, the thing that's been said by the court, what their view is that's on those files. It's not sexy children videos, but videos about vote rigging. And that is being concealed by media corporations and propagandized so that people don't even know that they don't even know. Well, this whole story about Jeffrey Epstein is all over the place, but the actual story about what's going on in the courts is not being told. So what I'm saying, this is mind-blowing information. If you think you're being informed by the media, you're being brainwashed. And this is not about, you must be a Donald Trump fan, because that's automatically, they have an agenda to destroy Trump. A real journalistic outfit has an agenda to report the truth, and to report what's been said by the court would surely be extremely important. But all they want to go on about is sexy children and Jeffrey Epstein, but they've said nothing about what surely the court's opinion, albeit that you'd have to not everyone understands that phrase without prejudice, or what the word preclusion means, that translated, when you can understand that there is nothing in that about sex, according to the court, it's got nothing to do with sexy children. It's about vote rigging. Those videos will show people, doing dodgy stuff with ballot boxes and stuff like that. And the various other things to do with vote rigging. So, so Trump had a presidency, and as he was leaving his first presidency, he took some files with him to Mar-a-Lago. Those files contain all the evidence of vote rigging. And they went and raided Mar-a-Lago to take those files away, and it's now the big subject of a big thing. And now they're telling us it's about Jeffrey Epstein and child abuse. But according to the courts, it's about vote rigging. According to Trump, it's about vote rigging. But you don't get to hear anything about what the actual story is by media corporations who are distracting people with Jeffrey Epstein and sexy children stories. Who are the paedophiles, who are the child rapists? That phrase paedophile, that word paedophile, its original meaning, it's originated before the media started using that as a character assassination attempt against anyone that was in there. They've got their own political agenda. They're not news. They are a political organisation out to pillage and destroy anyone that gets in their way in their road to power. They were using that paedophile. The actual meaning of the word paedophile comes from the Greek pedo, child, and phile, love. So yes, it does mean child love. But the people that sort of put these words together to describe things in short form of what's going on, they don't just pick out like Greek words to put together words randomly. That in Greek, filial does mean love, but so does erotic, so does agape. What the media corporations are accusing their political enemies of is not paedophilia in its etymological sense, as would have been understood at the time that they started using that word to accuse people in the 90s. What they're accusing these people of is actually paedoerotica, and it's two completely different meanings. So that's how twisted things are in media corporate. I've known this for 32 years because I live in Britain, where obviously we don't. Our democracy's a ridiculous farce, and the media corporations are not willing to admit that. I'm still waiting for the BBC to report democracy's a ridiculous farce. They're never going to do that because they're involved in the ridiculous farce, and they have been for 32 years. So I kind of reported this in my BitChute channel, and suddenly it's no longer working for some strange reason, Call me Mr. Suspicious, call me a nutty conspiracy theory, but I suspect there's foul play, So I thought I would say this on YouTube instead. So that I think I've said the bulk of what I'm saying here. That's what those files are about. So if you can get your hands on the court opinion that whereby they agree to release Volume 1, but refuse to release, but they prevent the release of Volume 2. You can actually read the document, and if you're not used to reading legal terminology and stuff like that, it might be a bit of a, it's only like 3 or 4 pages, but it's really, dense, geeky language for lawyers, but you can get a general gist of it, and you can find things like law dictionaries and stuff like that to work out what it's being said. But even if you're going to, like, if you read one of these sort of, a novel by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, you don't read Alexander Solzhenitsyn because I can't even pronounce that word. I'm just going to skip it. Alexander said, well, right, okay, and you keep reading the story sort of thing. So you read through the story, and there's bits and pieces you might not understand in this opinion of the court. And yet at the end of it, you get the idea that there is nothing in this about child sexual abuse. There's nothing in this about Jeffrey Epstein. It's about vote rigging. And that's not even been remotely covered by media corporations going on about Jeffrey Epstein. And the thing is, because of the media corporations and people just staring at them and just assuming that the media corporations will never lie, they've never looked at the court document to see the actual truth compared to this vast. They're all going on and on and on and on about Jeffrey Epstein, this Jeffrey, and it's like the only information you've got is by media corporations just making shit up. And the actual document itself is about vote rigging, you know. No, it doesn't say that there was vote rigging or there wasn't vote rigging, but that is what it is in relation to. And in the court's view, the thing that is on those files is evidence, not about sexy children, but evidence about vote rigging. Something that has been completely concealed by media corporations, completely censored by media corporations. While at the same time, they've created a massive distraction about sexy children. And everybody's, oh, we need to get Trump over sexy children. See when it comes out, if it ever comes out, if the only way in which these people will receive information about what it's really about is through the media, it's never going to come out for them. But for those people who go and look, it'll be like, oh my God, these guys are living in a zombie nightmare of fake reality. And that's what I'm saying. Stop believing it. It's crap. I'm not saying, now you start believing Donald Trump because he's right. I'm saying the media is totally gaslighting the shit out of you. When it's not just in regards to Donald Trump, there is tons of, I'm talking about stuff going way back 32 years ago. The media is gaslighting the shit out of you. And that's why I'm doing a video on YouTube, of all places. So thanks very much for listening.